So I'm Lee Gansky. I'm a member of a couple sustainability groups in our agency, the sustainability team and the sustainable transit team. Last week, our agency, let's see, we're getting transcriptions as well. Did I want to do that? Sort of boggles up yeah, we'll let that go. I'm not familiar with that. Anyway, last week our agency reported some good news on greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota. They're down, and I think for the first time ever, we were potentially on target to meet greenhouse gas emission goals for 2030. That good news is tempered by a few things. Number one, there's the question of whether COVID is responsible and whether we'll see a post-COVID rebound in emissions. I think, as we all know, greenhouse gas emissions are a global problem, so there's only so much that Minnesota can do on our own, and much more needs to be done. So that's what we're here to cover today. We've got 5 of your coworkers who are doing what needs to be done. And we're going to hear their stories. And I want you to remember that while these are sort of personal stories, individual actions, I'm willing to bet that there are government programs, education, tax credits, things like our agency is working on behind even these individual actions. So with that, we're gonna jump right in. And the presenters have like 5 to 7 minutes to tell their story, and then we're going to open it up for participants to ask questions. If you want to share a bit of your own story around green energy or energy conservation, that would be fine as well. So our first speaker is Paul Gardner. Paul, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Just making sure you've got good audio and you can see my slides. Yes?
Looks good.
Okay, great. I clocked this out at just about 7 minutes, Lee, so I'm gonna just zoom right in here. I won't belabor this first slide, but hi, everybody. I'm Paul Gardner. I'm the administrator for the Clean Water Council, but I'm a PCA employee out of the Commissioner's Office. And for the last 8 years, we have been on a journey, first out of necessity and now for carbon reasons, to try and get our house close to net zero. We're close to that. We're producing 88% of our annual energy needs from solar. And we have a ground-sourced heat pump. We have 1 electric vehicle, 1 hopefully on the way soon. Our annual energy bill for the first year after solar was actually less than 0. We had minus $68. We made 68 bucks. We have a house that's 50 years old in the suburbs. I'm just showing my little, I'm bragging here with our rain garden, or cascading rain garden in the front. But I offered to talk about the ground source heat pump part and the energy efficiency and insulation in 7 minutes. Dun, dun, dun. So here we go. First, we have a ground source heat pump. You will find out in a minute that this is not really the mainstream choice for energy, for moving away from fossil fuels in your house, but it is an option. The physics behind it actually explains air source heat pumps, which are going to be much more common. It took me 8 years before I found someone on YouTube who explained how a heat pump works that I can explain. The idea is that you use the constant temperature of the earth, which in our case, I've heard from 47 to 50 degrees here in Minnesota. If you're below the frost line, you use that constant temperature to either moderate or to increase the efficiency of heating and cooling. The geothermal company came out and they drilled 3 borings 180 feet down. We actually had to get a well permit. in our front yard. We have a 1/4 acre yard here in Shoreview, and into those borings were inserted these high-tech hoses, these what they call coils, and they carry ethylene glycol up and down and up and down and up and down the heat pump. It's kind of like taking a plastic straw, bending it in half, and sticking the bent end down into the hole, and then connecting the ends together into a heat pump. By getting 50-degree ethylene glycol into the heat pump in the house, the heat pump then uses refrigerant. This is the part that I finally figured out. Refrigerant in the heat pump is colder than 50 degrees, which then draws the heat out of the fluid. It goes into a compressor where my high school physics tells me that it speeds up electrons when you compress or speeds up the atoms, and it heats up to the desired temperature, in our case of 68 degrees from 50 degrees, and then it's evaporated it into our duct system. There are other systems that use underfloor heat when you're doing a new build, which are probably much more efficient, but we're using our existing duct system. Air conditioning works kind of the opposite way. You suck the heat out of the air in your house and inject it into or exchange it into the hose, which has the ethylene glycol. And then that heat dissipates into the ground as it goes down 180 feet 3 times. It's cheaper to do a horizontal loop system if you have the space, which is usually not the case for most of us. You can use a backhoe. Well, someone will use a backhoe, dig below the frost line, maybe 8 feet, lay the cable out that way or the hose into it in that fashion. So there's some pros and cons here. The pros are air source or heat pumps are 3 to 4 times more efficient than regular gas furnaces and electric air conditioners. That is where our efficiencies for reducing carbon emissions will really come. We do have a gas backup furnace that existed where our old furnace was, so that's an added expense. But I will tell you, it never runs. You're taking, we never have 0-degree air coming into the house. It needs to be heated up. It's 50-degree air that goes to 68. And then we get, 90-degree temperatures sucked out of the house, and also are able to inject 50-degree air back into the house for air conditioning. It's very disorienting in that you get a constant temperature. When you have a boiler or a standard gas furnace, the temperature goes up for a little while, and then it goes down and up and down and up and down and up and down. And you'll have hot and cold spots in your house. A heat pump creates a constant temperature. I call it like a saturating heat. It's very disorienting for a few weeks, and then you get used to it, and then you don't notice it. Ground source heat pump in particular will produce a lot of excess heat that you might not get with an air source heat pump. So that actually heats roughly 2/3 of our water during the year. So we get hot water for nothing. And the colder it gets, the hotter our water gets, or at least that feels that way. We never have a problem worrying about running out of hot water when the heat pump is on. Air conditioning, extremely efficient, less than $1 a day in the summer to cool the house in the hottest days. In exchange for using that ground source heat pump, Excel did require us to put in a separate meter, and that added a few $1,000s of expense. But we get charged roughly 4 cents a kilowatt hour for heating and cooling, which really makes the economics work. And of course, we've got a federal tax credit of 30%. The cons are you better forget about showing off your yard for a year after you dig up your yard. Even with those borings, they have to dig a trench to the house from those borings, and you're going to have to fill in the dirt later because it'll sag. So it's a mess, but we had to dig up our yard anyway for drainage reasons, so we did it at the same time. There are also fewer vendors who know how to do geothermal compared to air source heat pumps. And I will just be blunt with you, ground source heat pump is expensive up front. We had the extra meter, the backup furnace, as well as the borings and the heat pump itself. So the whole kit and caboodle 8 years ago was $27,000. But about a third of that we got back because of the tax credit and rebates within a year. And the payback period for this is 12 years, which is 100% better than using a gas furnace, which has no payback. We still use the furnace fan, which is a little odd, and uses some electricity. Okay, insulation. So we did, well, anyway, get an energy audit, find out where all your air leaks are, That gives you a to-do list, and then we put cellulose insulation in the walls every 2 feet, and say that our house is much, much cozier than it was, even for a house built in the 1970s. Also a mess. They drill holes. You have to use drywall mud and paint over it. But I can tell you in the last cold snap, we have been very, very cozy. So happy to tell you about the vendor too. All right, I'm done.
You're on mute, Lee.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, thank you, Paul. I'm sorry if I cut you a little short there. I didn't pay exact attention to when you started, but we're going to keep moving. I know some people are putting some stuff in the chat, which isn't, they're popping up, but they're not showing since the transcript's running, I think. So maybe we'll go through the presentations. I'll shut the transcripts off so we can interact with the chat. So next up, Jen Jevnasek. Jen, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Give me 1 sec as I pull up. I don't have a really super duper great presentation. I'm just kind of arm wavy. So for those who don't know me, I'm Jen Jevnasek. I'm an environmental specialist in Superfund, and I'm here representing sustainable transit so I don't own a car. I'm also a year-round bicyclist, and I've been a year-round bicyclist for 11 plus years and car-free for 7+ years. August will be 8. And most of my transportation, well, I should say, my transportation is mainly biking. So as a non-car owner, it's mainly biking, and then I also will use our car, which is car share service in the cities. And then I have some really great friends that will say, hey, you want to borrow my car? They'll offer that too. And then the other main thing that I do is busing and walking, because I live in St. Paul, and it's great because we have Metro Transit. And then the 23,000 miles that you see is slightly out of date. I went and checked this morning, and I'm actually at 23,500 miles. So if you want to be in the know, I'll send out an email when I reach the point of having transited around the Earth, which will probably be in the fall. So I actually own 2 bikes. This photo that you're seeing is me in St. Paul, and this is my non-winter bike, Anubis. He's a KHS CX100. It's a cyclocross bike. And then I also bike in the wintertime too, as noted before. This is my winter steed. His name is Ampharos. He is also a KHS. He's a mountain bike. And there's between these two slides, you'll see that I have some equipment. Mainly, I use panniers for most of my grocery shopping and just transiting in general. But, there's other people who also will have like a cargo bike, or they'll have a trailer attached, and it's super duper awesome. And then most bikes too, or I should say most buses also have racks in the front. So one of the common questions I get asked is do you use your bike everywhere? Like, is it all or one thing? To which I say, you don't have to take an all or nothing approach. You can do a multimodal thing where you bike to a spot, get on a park and ride, take the bus in. It's not as difficult as that super duper difficult to do it. It's just, it takes a little bit of planning and saying, hey, how am I going to do this? But that's the high level. Yeah, I'll stop sharing. I think most of my stuff will be more so centered around if people have questions. The other thing I was going to touch too is like pricing. So as not having owned a car for 7+ years now, it's difficult to say how much I've actually saved. But I can tell you in general, my expenditures for transiting and biking are less than 1,000, probably closer to like 600 or 700. So if you add that up over the span of 7 years, you're like, hey, and yeah, that does include my winter biking needs too. It's about 250 per bike for maintenance. So if you add up the 2 bikes, it's 500, and then I throw in a couple $100 just for miscellaneous things. So I'll stop talking.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. Our third panelist is Kristen Moroz-Reese. Kristen, take it away.
Okay, so Paul shared about ground source heat pumps or geothermal systems. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the air source heat pumps. I think Paul said this, but this is definitely what is becoming more mainstream as we're seeing a change to efficiency. Oh, I should introduce myself. Sorry. I'm Kristen Rose. I'm in RMAD and I run the Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations program. So I spend most of my day-to-day time talking about all kinds of sustainable related and clean energy efforts at the city level, and also thinking about how to do that in our own house. So we are in a 1947 house in St. Anthony Village. Right now, we added air source heat pumps system in 2020 because we were bored. So yeah, no, mostly it was because we were working from home and we didn't have air conditioning. We had no source of air conditioning before. And all of a sudden working from home on a second floor on a really hot day during the middle of the day turned into we need some air conditioning. And so this is what we ended up with. A few fast facts here. It works very much similar to the ground source system that Paul was talking about, but just with the air temperature. It's also, you may hear ASHP, shorthand for air source heat pumps. Also, mini split systems is a type of an air source heat pump. They also heat and cool. They transfer the air instead of converting it like a traditional AC system would. You can have central systems through ductwork, and you can have ductless. Those are those mini split systems. They do use refrigerant, so that's a consideration in thinking about global warming potential. Chemicals, and certainly something that I think the industry is trying to improve on. Air source heat pumps are not new. The technology's been around for 150 years. They've been pretty standard in warmer climates, but now they work in cold climates too. They've had a lot of improvements in the last few years and can be just as efficient down to 5 degrees and more and more so even lower than that. Okay, so this is our system. We just so full transparency, we paid $12,000 for the system. We did not get any rebates or tax credits. I'll talk about that in the next slide. So that's just flat out what we ended up paying for. We have one outdoor unit on the left there. That's what it looks like. It's a Mitsubishi unit, and we have 4 indoor head units. Most systems only have space for 1 to 3 indoor units. More and more are now allowing 4 units, and we had 4 spaces we wanted to heat and cool, so we ended up with this particular unit. We have remote for each of the systems, so we can control them separately, but we also have an app using Wi-Fi. So literally, if we're like out and about and we know our Nest thermostat, set our temperature to away, we can use the Wi-Fi to turn on the system so we have the temperature that we want when we are back. You can also pair them all so they work as one unit, but we don't normally do that because we're not in all 4 spaces at once. And we have 3 floor units on the top right there. So they're kind of boxes on the bottom of the wall, just because our walls have weird angles and everything, so we couldn't put the traditional upper wall unit on the bottom there. We do have one of those. That's typically what you see, but there's all kinds of options. You can get ones that look like more traditional floor vents or other venting options as well. Okay, so our bill, some things that we learned really did not change our energy costs as much as you would think, even when we didn't have air conditioning before. Excel doesn't give me information back to 2020, unfortunately, so I can't actually look at the summer change. But in general, we're using this in the shoulder seasons, in the spring and fall, and there's really no correlation, especially even when looking at temperature changes, where you're seeing those peaks are probably more because of the electric vehicle that we charge at home, and we just happen to be using it more at those times of the year. So really no change to our bill. And Okay, so other lessons, definitely check the rebate and tax credit requirements carefully. We thought we understood it. We did not. We ended up not getting a rebate from our utility because we didn't have the right system installed, even though we worked with the right contractor. And so, ask the questions up front for sure. There are lots of tax credits options that are becoming available and being announced, so keep an eye on those as well. Other things that surprised us is how quiet it is, really unnoticeable, at any time. Except for in the winter when it's going through a defrost mode, you'll hear it kick on and you're like, oh, what's that? And it's just a little cold outside and it needs to defrost. Totally normal. You do need to do some regular cleaning on the vents, just like you would a traditional ducted system. It's really easy to pop off the screen and you just wet them down. You don't need to go out and buy a replacement vent or anything like that. Super easy, but they do, because they're pulling in and exchanging air in your house, you need to make sure that those get cleaned. We do have a radiator gas boiler system that we do heat and we keep on in the winter. Our heat pump system isn't a cold climate system. And so specifically, anytime it's below 15 degrees, it just loses. It still works, but we just lose the efficiency of it. And you get those, those cold spots and hot spots, certainly as you're walking around the house. We don't have them in the bathrooms, for example, because that's a small space. And so that becomes a cold area. So we do use the radiators in the winter. Goal, electrify everything like this guy. There's a really good story on the clean energy resource teams about a family that decarbonized their home using a central air source heat pump, among many other things. Currently, bought a house in the fall in St. Paul, and we are gutting it. Very, very deep in demo mode right now, but our goal is to electrify. So we looked into geothermal. Unfortunately, our yard wasn't big enough to put the wells in that we needed. So we'll be doing a central air source system and look forward to sharing how that goes with all of you in the future, hopefully. Got lots of resources on here. Clean Energy Resource Teams is a really good third-party neutral organization that can help give you all kinds of information. I'll put that link. I'll put these links in the chat for you all as well. So yeah, good luck with your projects. It was really easy. There's lots of contractors out there that are doing heat pump systems now and are really knowledgeable. And we have air conditioning now, so that's a plus.
Thank you, Kristen. It's good to see all the activity in the chat. I finally just clicked over from transcript to chat so I can see that going on there. Our next panelist, Lindsay Rummery. Take it away, Lindsay.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, so my name is Lindsay Crummery. I'm a watershed project manager out of the Duluth office. And today I'm going to talk about living off the grid. My family and I live off the grid. I have a husband and an 11-year-old son. So I'm going to share a video. Hopefully it works. And so let's see here. This video I shot last year, so it's not totally up to date. It's missing some stuff like our chicken coop, and we've done some other things, but yeah, it's not super good, but hopefully it'll kind of just give a visual to go along with my talk here today. So I'm just gonna get started playing this. Okay. So we live on 20 acres out in the woods, about 30 miles south of Duluth, and we live off the grid. So when I say off the grid, I just mean we are not connected to the power grid at all. So we get all of our electricity from solar panels and then a battery bank to store it. And we purchased this land in 2014 using just cash, and then slowly carved our way out, like a place to start living here and a place to start homesteading was our goal. And at first we moved a temporary house onto the spot before we had the cabin. And to get our electricity, we ordered a DIY solar power system from Home Depot, because at this point we were completely debt free, and the power company wanted $15,000 to hook up to the grid, and they also wanted, we had to get an easement to go through our neighbor's property and stuff. So we just didn't want to do any of that. So what we ordered was a system that we could afford at the time, and it was only 4 100-watt panels. So yes, this is like really not a lot of power. So we learned quickly how to use a very little amount. And one of the major things to save power for us was to drill a well and install a hand pump, like a hand pump on there instead of the electric well pump and pressure tank system. So that worked out good for us. And we lived in our temporary house with no running water. We used an outhouse for a bathroom for 4 years. And we just finally moved into our cabin last November. But we really did love living off the grid. And so we decided to stay off the grid and just make some upgrades. And one of the reasons we just love living off the grid is like we don't have any utility bills, don't even have to deal with the utility company. We don't have the connection fees that they charge you for just every month. And then most of all, we're just totally in charge of our own power. And it's so nice to see like how much power each little appliance uses. Like for example, like coffee maker takes a whole bunch. And now, you know, I don't use an electric coffee maker, just things like that that I just really never even knew. Anyways, so now we increased our solar from 4 100-watt panels to 4 320-watt panels, which was a significant increase to us, but it wasn't, it's still not enough to be wasteful. So we're still saving energy by hand pumping our water and heating the water on the stove for dishes and for showering. And then we also use a composting toilet instead of a flushing toilet. And so this also significantly helps us save water, which is really important when you're talking about the wastewater component. And so we live next to Lake Superior, and we live in red clay, and they don't allow us to have a drain field here. So everybody around us has mound systems installed. And so basically they have to have their water pumped up to a hill, and that just takes more electricity. And so what we did was had a 2,000-gallon wastewater holding tank installed underground. And so our wastewater is just gravity fed into there. And since we use such little water, we only have to get that pumped out once a year. And so we do our laundry at the laundromat. So a lot of people always wonder that. But then we hang dry it all year long. And we use propane for our stove and our oven, which we hardly go through very much propane at all. And so we do heat our house with wood, but we purposely designed our house to be super small and very efficient so that we wouldn't have to go through very much wood at all. And this is our second winter here living in this cabin, and I can honestly say we don't go through very much wood at all. Our log cabin is made with 10-inch logs, so it holds in heat super good. It also in the summer like holds in the cool air also really well. And then our roof is really insulated very well, so that also holds in the heat. And our wood stove is the new EPA certified wood stoves that are built with the secondary burn to optimize the burning efficiency and then minimize emissions. And so just to touch on a couple of lessons learned here. So the months of November and December are really challenging in terms of sunlight. We just don't get a lot of sun in those months at all. And so we do want to get more batteries. And we also want to get a refrigerator. Right now our refrigerator runs on electricity, but we want one that can flip over to propane just on those days that are really, really dark and we are just not getting any electricity from our solar panels. And because right now on those days we have to charge up our batteries with a generator. And so that getting that fridge converted over would eliminate the need for a generator. Yeah, and so our future steps are just to continue gardening and preserving as much food as we can, and hunting, gathering, fishing, everything that we do that way, to hopefully try and get off the food grid as well, as we call it. But yeah, that's all I got. So thanks for listening to my story.
Lindsay,
Here.
thank you, and thanks for sharing that video. I'm so glad that worked out well. It was wonderful to be able to watch that while we were listening to you describe things. Okay, our last panelist is Carl Sonoyan, and then we'll get into some discussion. Carl, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm going to talk about residential solar. Hopefully you've seen more and more panels going up in your neck of the woods. The pictures on the screen are from our 1925 house in St. Paul. They're basically on install day or shortly thereafter. So I'll tell you my story and give you some considerations of what to think about when considering whether residential solar might work for you. I can find my slide. Okay, so you just heard about Lindsay's 4 320 watt panels. We have 12 365 watt panels on our very typical house. I think this is maybe even on the smaller side of residential solar projects. So ours totals a 4.38 kilowatt system. It's expected to produce more than 100% of our annual electricity. When it was scoped out and modeled, it's looking like it's actually going to be more like 130%. I'd say like air conditioning in the summertime and cooking throughout the year are our biggest electricity uses. But on average, we're probably smaller users of electricity than a lot. We did not opt for battery storage simply because of the extra price, and our goal was really to maximize the amount of green energy in the grid. And so when we produce extra power, it flows to the grid. Our neighbors can use it or wherever the electrons find themselves. But the problem is that when the power goes out, our panels do not produce power, nor do we have backup batteries. So we go out just like everybody else in the neighborhood. The upfront cost, the sticker price, was $14,500 for this system. There's 30% tax credit and some other financial incentives I'll talk about shortly. So we signed the purchase agreement in January. That's when the sort of modeling was done. They came out, flew a drone over our house, did all the measurements that way, determined whether we needed any extra structural support added to our attic to support the panels and the snow weight that they might bear in the wintertime. And they were installed in June. There was frustrating maybe 3 or 4 weeks where they were installed but not connected to the grid yet. It's just a matter of timing to get someone from Excel Energy out to flip a switch, basically. But we've been harnessing photons ever since July of 2022. Some considerations for you. You can use this website called Sunroof. Google has something to do with it. I think the aerial imagery might be a bit out of date, so maybe some trees have grown or come down since the aerial imagery was used to generate these images, but it's really cool. You can see the potential of all the roofs in the neighborhood. I will say the rooftop of our building in St. Paul looks really great. So does the parking lot for solar potential. The system size is really based on your own choice, whether you want to meet 50%, 100%, or more of your electricity use. Some of the incentives start to go away if you make a really big system. Apparently, Excel doesn't want a bunch of small power plants sprinkled throughout the city. Talked a little bit about battery storage. That's a choice of your own to make. If you want to go off grid, of course, you'll need battery storage. But if you maybe you're thinking about cost considerations, maybe that's something to wait on. Roof condition is important because you're going to have to replace your shingles still if you have a traditional shingle roof. Ours is sort of at the break-even point financially of whether to replace the roof and then do the solar panels or not. So we just sort of decided to try to let the materials live out their longest useful life, and we'll have to take our panels off to redo the roof and then put the panels back on. So that'll be an extra expense. There's lots of installers, some of them more reputable than others. I'll say that we went with All Energy Solar and had a good experience, but that's not to say that you won't have a good experience with somebody else as well. The panels are typically guaranteed 92% production for 25 years, but the life of them is longer than that. They'll just start to become less efficient over time. There is a 30% tax credit, net metering in Minnesota. Most states in the US have net metering now. So if you make extra power that beyond what you use, you get to sell it back to the utility at the same price you would buy it. So right now that's something like 13 or 15 cents per kilowatt hour. There are also some extra incentives. I got in on this solar rewards program. There's limited availability, and the financial incentive keeps dropping because of its popularity. So they're trying to spread the benefits out wider. I think this year it's down to 2 cents per kilowatt hour for 10 years. So I expect a check of like $180 or something in once a year on top of the net metering benefits. So most projects financially break even in 8 to 15 years, but it depends on the site. There's a lot of question about whether they increase your home value or not. It seems like they do, maybe 3% or so on average. And there's lots of financing options as well. If residential solar won't work for you, there are other options like solar gardens. If you're a renter, you can talk to your landlord. Excel has programs like WindSource and a solar rewards program specifically for community solar. So there might be other options. I did want to show you one more thing, if there's time, which is just our.
Go ahead, Carl. Yep, go ahead, Carl.
Okay, cool. So this is the 15-minute increment production use, which is fun. It's also on an app on my phone. So I had a new favorite app for a couple months. But today you can see we've made, sorry about that. We've made 4.5 kilowatt hours. We've used 3.2, so we're above net zero today. And you can break it down. You can even see the specific output of each individual panel. So these are the south-facing panels, the west-facing panels. They haven't gotten much sun yet today. For most of the last 2 months, this side has been covered in snow, which is a huge disappointment. But just waiting for the longer days of spring to come. Solar on your house makes sunny days even better. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. Okay, so let's move into the Q&A, the discussion. If some of you want to briefly share a story, love to have that. I think we can, let's try. You can use the raise hand function. Good, we got someone there. I'll call on you in just a second. You can use the chat. I'll try to moderate the chat and restate questions there. I just want to say that I think we all know that any one of these people could have been the centerpiece of the program for the entire time we have here. So I feel bad about that aspect of this. But on the flip side, all of you who are listening here today, depending on where your interest lies, you have 5 resources to help you with projects or actions that you may be contemplating yourself. So with that, let's see, I think that first hand that popped up was Kurt. So go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, I was just curious about, like, so I hear about solar panels being installed on top of a roof. What about roofs made of solar panels? Like shingles made of solar panels or something like that. Because if you, once every, I don't know, 30 years or so, or maybe every 5 years now that the hailstorms come, but you might have to re-roof your house. Then you got to remove solar panels on top of that. So anyways, I was curious if there's any information out there about the actual roof being a solar panel.
They
I'm
do
guessing we might have
exist.
a couple. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah.
Yep.
They do exist. I actually looked at that, and some of the mainstream shingle manufacturers have toyed with it. The main issue is having someone who knows how to install them. That would be the major issue. And I couldn't find anybody at the time. Tesla has the solar shingles, but they seem to have retreated somehow. Tesla tends to raise expectations and then pull back and then do something else. Like they're still trying to get that electric pickup truck out. And I've heard of one person in Wisconsin who put in the solar shingles, but in terms of speed and having people who know how to do it, adding the solar to the roof has worked for scale a lot easier. But we can still dream. If anybody knows different, let us know.
They do qualify for the 30% tax credit. I do know that. If that's a consideration.
Okay, good. Thank you. Laura, I think you had your hand raised. Milberg?
Yep. So, sorry. I was going to share my experience really briefly. I know there are also some questions in the chat that other people probably want answered, but we downsized a few years ago from a very efficient, though big, house, and the people who bought our home said they chose it because it was so efficient and had solar and modulating boiler and very well insulated and everything. So that was interesting. But then, so we've been renting since then. And our recent experience is that we've decided we're going to be moving this fall to a new development that's being built in St. Paul. And because we got in at the very beginning while they're still constructing it, we were able to, though paying extra money to do this, get them to substitute an induction convection range for our unit as the only unit that will have one. So we have to pay the difference for it, but we'll be able to have that in our unit. So that will be something to talk about later this fall when we start to figure out how to cook induction, stovetop, and convection up. So, but excited to do it.
Thank you, Laura. Let's see. Denise Frischman Denise, you have your hand raised, and I'll also try to look. I know some questions are getting answered in the chat, but I still may go back to some of those questions in the chat and call folks out here. But Denise?
Hey, so I had a couple questions for Lindsay and then another one about the solar panels. So, Lindsay, do you guys harvest rainwater or have a like a solar greenhouse or something that you use to protect your garden from the elements and such?
Yeah, so we do have rain gutters that go into a big like white tote for harvesting rainwater. And then we have a greenhouse, but it's not like we don't heat it or anything like with, energy, electricity or anything. We just basically put all the plants in the house, all the starter plants, and then transfer them out to the greenhouse once it gets, where it's not going to freeze them or whatever. And so then they can get nice and big out there, and then we transfer them into the garden. So
Okay.
we do have a greenhouse for that. And it's great to have a greenhouse because I go in there all winter long and just, are able to get out of the elements and stuff. But
Awesome.
Yep.
Thanks for that. And then, so for the solar panel question, we have a metal roof. Does anybody know? I mean, is that possible to still have solar panels on that, or is that going to be an issue weather-wise or otherwise?
Paul, I don't think there's any issues. I've seen panels on metal roofs. In fact, some people are, before putting on new shingles, they put on a metal roof and put the panels on top of those in one fell swoop. So.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to think of your roof as an integrated whole here. We had issues with moisture in the attic, and so when we air sealed as part of our energy efficiency, that was a factor. But you might want to see what the lifespan is of your shingles. And by the way, you can get these storm-resistant shingles, which we went with before we did solar, that actually get you a rebate from your home or from our homeowner's insurance provider. It cost us a little extra to get them, but we got a rebate that paid, just paid for itself in 2 years.
Great.
Great. Thank you.
I noticed that Brian Green had put something in the chat here about Brian, do you just want to comment on what you put in the chat?
Yeah, I can. So I've also got solar on my roof, and the company that I went with offered a 25-year warranty that's actually transferable. So if I ever sell, that warranty goes with the panels. But of course, those warranties are only as good as the company. If they go out of business, the warranty's gone too. But it offers a one-time removal and replacement of the solar panels. So if when we have to replace our shingles, they'll come out, take the panels off, and then put them back on after we've done the shingles. So if you're looking at different companies, that's something to consider as well. And that, to respond to the question too on metal roofs, they can go on those. I've got a friend that's putting them on his shed. And as far as some of the stuff that Carl's talking about with snow sitting on the panels, I've noticed that I think a metal roof might actually allow the snow to clean easier, because right now, they'll tend to slide off the panel a little bit, but then they get hung up on the shingles. So if you had a metal roof, I think they would clean off a lot easier.
We actually aren't doing solar right now. The pitch on our roof is so shallow that I'd rather not break my leg falling off the roof to get the small amount of solar that we could get right now. So we just let it go. But the numbers just shoot way up in the summer that allow us to have a credit for 6 months out of the year. Say, I was going to make one consumer protection suggestion, and that is if someone suggests that you pay upfront for your solar, that you'd be a little suspicious. The companies that have been around a while usually have a monthly payment plan and work with a nonprofit financer that will let you do a monthly payment, which is what we're doing. And I do know of somebody who actually did pay money up front, and then the company disappeared and they got nothing. So
thank you for that, Paul. There's a couple questions in the chat, and thanks, Brian, as well, if I didn't already say that. Let's see, Cassandra asks, critters and PV systems. Anyone want to comment on that? Squirrels?
I have heard of squirrels getting in the space between the panels and the roof. There's some logic of having the panels up a bit so that they cool off on the bottom to run more efficiently. And so some people have used these squirrel guard things to keep them off. I haven't had any issue with it. Kristen says always get a referral. I would say yes. I think all of us will probably get a little credit for any referral we give, but I think we all have got experience working with somebody.
So I can answer a little bit on that too. We haven't had any issues with squirrels or anything, mice or anything biting through the wires or anything because they're all encased in conduit. The one thing we did have was we used to keep our batteries stored outside in a box, and we did have like squirrels and mice get into that box. So we don't do that anymore. We store them inside, but yeah, maybe because they're warmer and the batteries themselves has attracted them. But other than that, we haven't had any issues with critters. And then also I seen a question on there about snow. So I had this question too, actually. For those of you who have the rooftop solar, because every day I have to go out and like I use a squeegee and I like squeegee the snow off of our solar panels and it works so good. And I couldn't imagine if they were on my roof because that would be very challenging. So I just wanted to know how it works for you guys in that.
Practice patience till it warms up.
Yeah, Lindsay, I can answer that because I do clean mine off. I have the 10-year incentive from Excel for me is 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So it right now it makes sense financially. Once I'm not getting that incentive after 10 years, I probably like Carl and Paul, I probably won't do it. It just isn't. Plus, I'll be 10 years older and I don't know if I really need to be up on a ladder pulling the snow off my roof. So right now I do it because there's a financial incentive for me, but probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But they do say, you want to be very careful because if you damage a panel, the warranty is gone. So you want to keep that in mind too. I have like a squeegee type one. It's more of a foam kind of thing, so it shouldn't do any damage.
Yeah, I'd actually have to get on my roof to clear them because I have a snow rake where I was trying to get the stuff that's just lower than that so that anything would slide off and not have it. And the pitch of the roof is such that I have to go way back to do it. And it just doesn't work. But safety is really important. A hospital visit is way more expensive than the value you get out of getting a couple of kilowatts in January.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed there.
I'm of a certain age that I must think of that.
Yeah, I would second that. Okay, as moderator, I'm going to interject a question here, but keep them coming in the chats or in the chat or raise your hands. So, and this is going to be to all the panelists, and that is how much interest in what you're doing have you had from friends, family, neighbors, etc. outside of, I mean, there's obviously interest here today, so we're seeing some of that. So I'll start with Jen on this one.
I think
Do
most
people know, Jen, what you do? Do they, your neighbors and such, do they know your choice there?
Mostly people don't know about what I do, and when people find out, well, mostly people are curious about the winter biking thing. So they're approaching it from the perspective of, oh my gosh, it's winter. I'm freaking, well, freaking out isn't the right word choice, but like people don't realize that you don't have to stop biking just because there's snow on the ground. And there was a person who asked about snow plowing, and the reason I said I'd touch on it later is because depending on what city you live in, they prioritize different routes. So arterial routes get cleaned quicker than residential routes. So you don't have to like stop. You can actually go on an arterial route or you can go on a bike path. It's not that weird. So it's really more of a curiosity. And then like I mentioned before, people are like, it's an all or nothing thing, and it's really not. I mean, it's like once you get the bug, you can start doing it and saying like, well, I'm going to do it once. Now I'm going to say, expand this out to be like, okay, I'm going to go to the grocery store, which is like a mile away, or I'm going to try the bus just because like it's there. So it's kind of getting people into the thing to say, hey, let's go for it instead of saying all or nothing and like, I'm not going to do it because I have concerns.
So. Solar is definitely the thing that neighbors ask about because they can see it, and occasionally an electric vehicle when they see it in the driveway, but most people can't see the heat pump. So no one asks about that. And that's where I worry that adoption will be the lowest because there will be less word of mouth about it. Even though that's
Yeah.
probably the most impactful thing you can do to actually reduce your carbon emissions in your house is heating and cooling.
Good. Kristen? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Actually, let me step in just for a second and say, we're going to let this, if there are, I think maybe all of our panelists can stay a little past 12:30. We have a hard stop time at 1, but if we want to keep this discussion going, if there's still a few people, we will do that. So go ahead, Kristen.
I would just add what Paul said. I think I like work in this general clean energy field. I do a lot of sustainability, education and outreach and technical assistance. And I struggle with understanding, especially right now as we're getting quotes for our other house project, just understanding geothermal systems and what is and isn't possible. And now we're switching to central air source, so it's like all other kinds of questions. It's just not that clear. It's not like going to the grocery store and like, picking the organic instead of the non-organic option. It's much more complicated. And so, I mean, I think that is hard, but know that there are resources out there. I think, talking to friends, neighbors, family who have systems and have, done many of the things that we talked about today can be really helpful because it's all possible. It's all doable. It just might take a little bit of a learning curve.
Thanks, Kristen. Lindsay, what are people asking you? What kind of
Yeah.
curiosity do you get?
I get like a pretty mixed bag of things. Like with my family, some just don't understand it. They don't even understand sustainability at all either. So then I get it. Like I get that, I guess. But then you also have like the way other like on social media and people that find I try to make it like as inspirational as I can to try to make people want to be sustainable. And so I find that to be, I don't know, I feel like that's like what I can do. That's to me, it's like the most instead of like telling people that I know maybe, and more like preaching to them, like, oh, you should be like this. I just kind of show by example, and like those people that are really interested in living off grid or doing some of the practices that we do, definitely, they show interest. And there's so many like off-grid homesteading groups like on Facebook or like YouTube. We had a YouTube channel for a while and we're starting it back up after now that we've learned some things. And I feel like it's my way of just trying to inspire people. But yeah, I mean, and those people who are inspired and those people who are trying to do it are very interested. So
Yeah. Thanks, Lindsay. Carl?
Yeah, our neighborhood block party group, the organizers of that reached out to me to talk about the solar project at our annual get together, and there was a lot of interest there. And really in the past 2 years, I've just seen so many more panels going up on houses and hope to continue it. But yeah, the more people see, the more they realize that it's acceptable and doable and maybe a good idea.
And there are always neighbors older than we are, guys who say, wow, heat pumps, and they remember stuff from 20 years ago and they're not helpful. So the more success stories we have, the better.
Yeah. And I see Mark mentioned he got questions when his geothermal wells were being dug. I bet you did. Mark, you want to say anything about that? Yeah, on the spot here.
Yeah, I can have to remember it because this was back in like 2007, 2008 when this was going on. But the main thing that I got questions about were I live not too far from a railroad area that has had hazardous waste, ground water contamination, that type of thing. So the first question I got was people wondering if they were drawing a well for monitoring. And I was like, no, I'm putting in a heat pump. And they're like, well, heat pump, what's that? So then I got to go through my whole spiel. And then what was interesting was there was a house that was built about 3 or 4 blocks from mine shortly after I got my heat pump installed. And that one was a new construction project, and it was like super efficient green building house. And they put in a ground source heat pump, and it was an even smaller lot than mine. But they were building new, so they got to do all the efficiency and insulation, all of that stuff that would have been hard to do on my house that was built in 1906. And so that probably deflected some of the attention from me. People could go and visit that house, and they actually did tour and stuff. So you could walk through and see all the stuff that they did there. But yeah, it was interesting at the time. I mean, nobody had these things when I was putting mine in. I was like the second person in my life that I even knew, because my dad was the first. He had one out in Andover, and he was able to do horizontal loop because he had this huge yard.
Well, there-
But yeah, he walked me through the process for it. It's been a really, really nice investment.
Mark touched on a recipe right there, the intergenerational conservation, right? So that's an important link too here. Okay, let's see. I'm taking a look at the chat here. Actually, I wanted to go back. Holly, you made a comment, if you're still on, about I think you described your heat pump as an open loop heat pump, if I had that right. Yeah, an open loop geothermal system. And is Holly still on? Probably lost her. I know we're past our time. Does anyone know what's an open loop versus I presume a closed loop? Kristen, can you answer that? Do you know?
Right, Paul? The open loop is the horizontal one.
Well, a closed loop is where there's no interaction between the fluid in
You're
the hose and the surrounding environment. So our system doesn't touch the aquifers at all. It just takes in the heat or the cold. An open loop system
And an open
might,
loop would have to have some kind of water body involved with
right,
it.
you
or
circulate it, you
something
actually are
that
sucking water
to
from,
allow for heat transfer, right?
right, so you're taking water, let's say, out of your local
And
lake
open,
and,
but that can be an option for most people.
right.
Got
It's-
it. Okay. Okay. We still have quite a number of folks hanging on here. So if there are a couple more questions, okay.
Ooh, there's a good one that
Ah.
just came in from
Yep.
Cassandra Meyer. Does anyone have
Yeah.
solar thermal experience with how
Yeah.
it works? I've been curious
Yeah.
about this too. I've seen it
Yeah.
as an improvement done in low income situations where it's basically a black box on the side of your house with a fan, 2 holes and 2 fans or 1 fan, and it heats the air in the black box from the sun and pushes it back into your house. I've seen some in our neighborhood, to be honest, but I don't know of anybody that has one.
Yeah, that's a solar furnace, which is different than solar thermal because that's
Oh.
air. So solar thermal is when you're heating your water, and we had solar thermal on the house, our former house, which we used to, with the sidearm to heat our hot water. So it's a modulating boiler and then a sidearm, and the solar was feeding into that, but it didn't feed directly into our boiler system and our hot water heat, so radiator heat. So it was kind of limited in what it did, but it worked fine for what it did. It helped shave off our water heating bills. I'm sure it's better now. That system was put in quite a while ago.
Was that rooftop then, Laura?
Yeah, it was rooftop, yeah. And there were a lot of problems getting it on at that time with city ordinances and what could be seen from the street. We were in a historic district They were very difficult to work with. So, but anyway, we had to take down one of the panels. Finally, it was showing too much. So anyway, always interesting complications. I think, a lot of this has been addressed more recently as climate crisis becomes clearer.
Okay, I have one final question then, because I don't see questions, any other new questions on the chat that haven't been dealt with. A lot of nice appreciation from Heidi on the chat. So my closing question for all the panelists is one piece of advice for your coworkers considering similar actions to the actions that you are taking. And I realize some of that advice was in your presentations, but I'd encourage you to restate something, or if you have a new piece of advice that wasn't in your presentation. So Paul, go ahead. You look like you.
Sorry, I'm a middle-aged suburban dad, so I have to do this. No, I would just say don't stress out, because everyone's good at something. Some of you are good at food and the related carbon emissions by not eating meat. Some of you are good at transit because of where you live. Some of you own a house, and so you meet the problem where it is. And so I would just suggest that you make a list of every major system in your house if you do have a single family house, and you're going to replace everything eventually anyway if you live there long enough. So when something breaks, that's when you have a chance to replace it with something better. Don't worry about trying to do everything right away. Time is kind of your friend here.
Thank you, Paul. And Paul, actually, since you're on, a question did pop up in the chat. Do you want to take a quick glance at that and answer that question?
Well, Anna said that I said that you shouldn't do geothermal and do air source heat pump. Look, let me put it this way. I would say that if you are looking at heating and cooling systems, start looking at air source heat pumps first, certainly for expense, and also pair that with increasing the efficiency of your house, sealing air leaks, get an energy audit. That's as Carl suggested, that's actually the cheapest thing you can do is seal up your building envelope. And that tells you how much load you need to heat and cool your house. And so you can size an air source heat pump well. But if your property is particularly conducive to digging, then a ground source heat pump option could be good. But you may end up waiting longer because it's more complicated. There's one guy who comes out and drills the holes, another guy comes with a backhoe, and then other guys come in and install the heat pump, and then it's just more involved. Whereas we have a mini split in our a sunroom over here, which we only run once in a while, and that guy put it in 3 hours. I mean, it's easier. So it just depends on where you're at, what you are willing to do, and what the lay of the land is on your property, really. But if you can plan ahead for what you might do, that will help you in case there's a crisis. Like if your furnace fails, you need to do something right away.
Yeah.
So sometimes you want to plan a little bit ahead. If your furnace is on its last legs, maybe in the summer before you think you'd replace it, do that research. And yeah.
So, Anna, if you want to follow up with Paul or Kristen on others, Mark Schneider, you got some resources here. Lindsay, you got a lesson for folks? Piece of advice?
I guess my biggest piece of advice would be to just try and, like, no matter where you live, right? You can do little things all the time. I think just trying to be energy efficient in everything, and like, it's so inconvenient for people to with the modern way of living, people think it's inconvenient to do certain things, but like I just feel like, yeah, it is inconvenient, but just do it. I mean, that's what we have to do. Like, just you don't have to do all these conveniences all the time. You might not be able to go to that, football game on the weekend because you're canning or you're blah blah blah, and it's not always fun, but it's like that's what we have to do. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate it. Jen?
So this isn't a particularly sexy answer, but it's an important one. Advocate for policy change, because you can do your individual actions. So like I can bike everywhere and take the bus, but it's a fundamental systemic issue if it's not properly funded, or if a city or county or state doesn't know that it's something that needs to be addressed. So always advocate for policy change to make it better.
And there's particular areas where you can do that in your city too. I live in Shoreview, which isn't huge, but I've gone to the city council and the planning commission a couple of times when they did their EAWs, good time, and just said, if you're going to develop this property, please make sure that you essentially wire it for whatever may come in the future, whether it's the ability to handle solar or electric heat pumps or electric vehicles, so that you don't have to rewire it later, which is a big problem. Housing is being built now that isn't ready to take that stuff, so that you have to do more expense to fix it later. So the city council has actually bugged developers in 2 cases because I showed up and said, yeah, what about that? And then they agreed to put that stuff in their proposals. So there's things you can do where no law is passed or anything, but you can get your local leaders to ask the right question. Now I'm trying to get them to advertise in their utility bill mailers and newsletters that there's all this money for rebates and credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, so people can save money. It's not just about the city hall getting greener, it's about everybody doing their part. So, and someone had a good suggestion of that we should show people our stuff in a local paper.
Yeah, that was Kristen, I think, right? Suggested we try to, yeah. Carl, piece of advice?
Yeah, one group that may have sort of been left out of this conversation are apartment and condo dwellers. To those folks, pull what levers you can. I think you should be happy that you're already using less energy than a typical single family home would. So that's great. You're sharing walls. You're probably using less space. Renters have power. You guys can organize. Condo owners, you can infiltrate your board to advocate for retrofitting, composting, organizing a reuse and treasures table, make common spaces more efficient, that sort of thing. So you guys have power too. It's just might take a little more community organizing.
Yeah, thanks, Carl, for bringing that group into the discussion. And Kristen, you get the final piece of advice for folks here.
I mean, we've talked about it. I know there's been questions about it, but take advantage of the tax credits. This is, maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity with all of the money that's coming federally through the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're seeing increased grant and financing options through the state and utilities as well. So take advantage of what's out there. My favorite website, I think Paul mentioned it earlier, is the Rewiring America calculator tool. It goes through and tells you kind of what's available and a little bit more about how to access it, what's becoming available. Take advantage. Yeah, it's out there for you.
Thanks, Kristen. Laura, yeah, you got a question?
Well, I'm just, and looking at the IRA tax credits, it looks like very many of them are low and moderate income, and it's only for kind of really higher or more unusual technologies that it's available for everyone, but I'm not sure that I'm reading it correctly, so.
No, there are definitely income caps, but there are still things available regardless of income. There is certainly a focus on putting money towards low income and areas of the country that need that support financially, but there are still plenty of tax and rebate options available
Yeah,
for
they
all
have
kinds of projects.
there's usually the income cap is particularly on rebates, which are like instant savings as opposed to tax credits to people who have higher enough income that they're itemizing and all that.
Right. But I only saw like tax credits for like boilers and not for like kitchen appliances and things like that. So that's what I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I've seen the one for the stoves. They also will there are credits and maybe rebates to upgrade your electrical panel too, which a lot of older homes really need in order to run everything at once.
Yeah, there are a lot of things there. I was just thinking
But-
from a renter's perspective, it looks.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty limited.
Yes,
I
from a
would-
renter's
and-
perspective.
It does
And-
take a
and-
little work to plow through that thing to figure out what you qualify for too.
Okay, with that, then I think we'll call this to an end. I'm gonna stop the recording and I think, well, we'll see what happens to the recording.